So next on the agenda is a panel discussion on the topic of banking beyond banking, hosted by Jemina Kelly from Financial Times. Jemina is an experienced journalist focused on the financial sector. She's in the past also reported for Reuters and The Economist. I will leave the floor for Jemina to introduce her panel. Please join me in welcoming Jemina and the panel to the stage.
Hello. I would like to welcome onto stage our other panelists. We have Georg Ludviksson, CEO and co-founder of Meniga. Then we have Grétarsdóttir, who you've already met, who is brand director at EA Games. We have Aage Reerslev, CEO and co-founder of Wrapp. And we have another panelist who I think is joining us shortly, who's just late, who we've also already met, Pierre-Yves Guegan from UniCredit, who's joining us now. So, welcome. I hope I've pronounced all those very difficult to pronounce names kind of semi-correctly. So, I guess, I mean, the name of this panel is quite a broad one, and we've been really covering this subject all day. So it's going to be, I hope we're going to get some fresh ideas up here as well, because I guess we've talked about open banking, we've talked about API or die, so maybe we're going to take this into a kind of bigger picture question and think about the real benefit that you know, beyond banking is going to bring to us. So maybe I could start with quite a big question, which is who ultimately is going to be, and this is for any of you, who ultimately is the beneficiary of all of this data that we're bringing into banking? Who's the biggest winner ultimately? Is it the customer? Is it the banks? Is it the fintech startups? Who's the biggest winner from all this? I think the microphones are.
Yes, if I can start trying to answer that. I think undoubtedly the people, the customer is the end customer is the ultimate winner. It's very hard to predict the future, and us technology companies and anyone working with technology tends to get too much excited about technology, but it's really about the actual use cases. For example, I think open banking is now, we have lack of use cases. I mean, I think it's true that we've heard here today, it's we're building foundations, we're consolidating data, but we're adding intelligence and machine learning on top, but that's not really important unless it helps someone truly. Mm-hmm. And that means use cases, and I think still we have relatively few good use cases. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of investment, and I think it's we will see more and more. And it's down to the simple stuff. I mean, we, for example, and some of it maybe require fancy technology, but other things are quite simple. Like we found out, a simple example, Finner mentioned that this sending out this weekly report on Sundays, we now know that a lot of people like it, but we have to do maybe 10 experiments with things to see what actually works. And you really have to understand at a deep level and convince yourself that it is a good use case. Mm-hmm. And so many opportunities, but it comes down to this.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Does anyone else want to say anything on that? On what's the greater purpose of all of this? Is all of this innovation going to make us happier? Is it going to make our lives better? Are we going to become more? Are our societies going to become more equal? Is there any kind of greater good, or is this just kind of repackaging and just finding business for business people, or is there anything kind of greater that we can get from all this?
I think there are two things that we can talk about. That is one, with what we're seeing in the vast change that's coming, is that we have to actually think about more the loyalty of the customers, because if with the barrier to actually choose different business partners is going to be lower, it's going to be based much more on loyalty. And I do think that unfortunately a lot of customers are showing loyalty because they're kind of stuck. And if they don't have that, we have to think about how can we build that over time. And as you were saying, it has to be then how are you going to create value for the customers? And if you think about generation, you will see a large generation that's growing up now that actually believes that companies are not supposed to be just profit-oriented. They're supposed to be active, responsible agents in society, and there has to be a purpose to them. And that becomes about, okay, how will these companies then be challenged to actually be that and do that? And be that in the mind of those customers. So not just creating value to them, but making them feel like, okay, my bank or the banking institution that I will pick or partner, how are they making the world a better place? Because that's what the generation will ask for.
So it's not just about what we want for ourselves, but we're expecting our banks to also be ethical banks, and we're expecting them to kind of be doing something positive for the greater.
I mean, that seems to be the data that's showing us that that's what and it's us collectively. We are the ones who are raising this generation. And that seems to be what their beliefs are and what they want. So that's something that we have to respond to at some point.
Pierre-Yves, what is the role of a bank in 2018? What should it be doing and what should it not be doing? And should it be doing, sorry, long question, should it be limiting itself to a small number of activities, or should it be trying to do everything? I mean, it's a little bit of a big question, but essentially what's the role of a bank?
It's a very big question, and in fact it depends as well from where you're watching this question. If you're watching it from the bank's IT perspective, we should limit ourselves because of the capacity to go further. If you watch from the business perspective, we would like to go faster, to go beyond, to try to become the primary bank of the customers, because we know that customers are watching around what's happening. We don't have any issue if a customer has several bank accounts. We have an issue if we start to lose the contact with the customer. So I believe that we need to focus on the engagement. And the point this morning about the engagement between Barclays and Monzo is very interesting. Probably we need to rethink the way we consider the engagement, because we focus a lot on the mobile active users, on the logins. But is it really the engagement? I'm really asking myself the question, because if you go to your mobile app because you're looking for information and you want to know this information, it's not the same like if you receive something meaningful. And well, as you're speaking about the future, I want to stay as well a little bit candid and with fresh eyes. I'm still thinking about Meniga's dream, which is to change the behavior of the customers with their challenges, to give them a reason to go to the mobile app and to the banking app, not only to follow your finances, to check your balance, to make some money transfer, but as well to play with it and to feel that it's a part of yourself. So it's a very big question.
I think there's an assumption that like millennials want, the customer, they want to be more, their banks to be more engaged with them. And we've talked, I think a few speakers have talked about this before, but earlier today, and obviously this is what Meniga is doing as well. But as a millennial myself, I don't know if that's necessarily what I do want, and I am a user of these new kind of challenger bank apps. So I, for example, use Monzo and Revolut. The reason I use them is not because they give me not because they engage with me, it's because they offer better rates abroad, right? So it's just that what they're offering me is the actual exchange rate is better than it might be with my bank. And friends of mine use Monzo because it's a prepaid card, so they want to be able to load up some money onto a card and know that that's a budget for the week. It's not so much the data insights that they're getting, and further to that, there was a recent example with a challenger bank that had been monitoring people's travel spending, because in London we have a system where we just tap into these things called trains that we have in the UK, and they'd noticed, and if you get a monthly travel card if you can pay in advance, you actually end up paying less. And so this challenger bank wrote to the customers and said, just so you know, and similar to the kind of thing that I guess Meniga might do, just so you know, you would actually be better off, buying yourself a monthly travel card. And there was a bit of a backlash because people were like, hang on a second, this is way too invasive. I don't want this kind of engagement from my bank. So, I mean, are we sure that this is the direction that we're going in? And do you think that there could be some space for a company that offers to like stay away from all of your lives? And could there be a gap in the market for that kind of offering?
I'm glad to answer that, because that goes back to your first question about what is this leading to. And I think if we're definitely from a European perspective right now, with the intention of freeing up data, not just for the banking sector, but in general with GDPR, etc., and putting the user in control of it. And obviously that is going to have a great impact over time for me to understand, shit, my data has value. If I check it in to a certain application or a certain vendor, I can receive something back for it. And with that, it's coming to the people's understanding, which younger people definitely already know, because if they check into a service, they know that they're getting something back for it. So that will sort of change the game. And I think your example from London is very good, because if that was the offer proposed to the users, that this is the function you're going to get, you're definitely going to get people that like that. But if you're going to be presented with the facts, shit, this is your travel spending, do you want to change it? No, hell no, get rid of it. So I think that's the perspective. And people are not stupid, they understand this already with all these services, so they gladly like to rely on technology. If you provide me a good service, yes, I'm on.
I just wonder if we're going to see like a back to basics. Like I'm a journalist, but if I was thinking of setting up a business, I might think that it would be a good idea to set up some kind of vanilla bank. We've seen people buying kind of back to basics mobile phones, and there seems to be also a bit of a move towards wanting the human back. So, for example, Nutmeg, which is this robo-advisory. Because it's not that much using robots, but it calls itself a robo-advisory investment manager based in the UK, and they've just introduced human phone calls. So customers have really started to kind of push back again on this idea that they're just not engaging with an actual person. So I just wonder if there's space for a bank or a firm to come in and say, actually, we're going to leave you alone. And I mean, I don't know if there is any kind of business proposal in that, but
I think you probably just want to do a bit of research to see who is interested in that, etc. And I personally think that one great indicator is to ask, for example, this audience here, who actually declines GDPR pop-ups when they come up. Because from what I'm seeing, from most people, it's probably, yes, this is about right, like 0.5%. So one person out of every 200 would actually say, no, don't personalize anything for me. I want to be anonymous. But most people are like, well, I know I'm going to get ads, so, better make them personalized, because I at least, in 2 cases, at least want something that's relevant to me. So I think that, yes, eventually there is going to be an audience that's going to want that, and I think we still have it. But that's also our own fault in some sense, because we're not great at this yet. We're still working it out. So of course people will be pushing back. But you would see the same thing from when Walmart was doing personalized and hyper targeting in their offers. They would target, for example, women, that they had found algorithms that were like, okay, we believe these women are pregnant. So they were sending them, congratulations, here's an offer. And that was, well, like, that's super creepy. Because how would they know? But their algorithms were right. What they would end up doing is that they would just send out offers and say, hey, here's a discount on all sorts of stuff. And by the way, also, and then we'd actually just put in relevant messages as well. But they never really felt like they were being hyper-targeted at you, and then they weren't presented in that way.
Yeah.
But they were more useful, and they had more value to their customers.
I think the GDPR example is an example of something that's kind of meant to protect the consumer, but ends up just being a faff. I mean, I guess if we could vote for like not having those pop-ups, I mean, we might vote for the underlying regulation, but it seems like a faff.
Yeah, just to comment briefly on your point. I think, I mean, with the ever-increasing speed of technology, I mean, I think we'll see more and more pushback. I think there's more appetite for digital detox or leave your phone at home one day a month kind of tactics. But still, I think if you look at numbers, this is very, very few people that do this, and we are not going back to. I mean, and then if we think about whether it's our phone or anything else in technology, I mean, this is such a much better world. My phone today has my map, my radio station, my contact book, my communication, my pictures of the last 10 years, everything. So this is not something I want to really go back to, but there are lots of problems with new technology when it comes faster. I think the tendency to push back and slow down is stronger. So niche players that can give you respite from this and back to basics, I think, will increasingly pop up, but I think they will remain niche. The flow of technology is not stopping, and we generally have to adapt it. And I think key insight, whatever we try in this line, what is creepy and what is not, I think, and for example, we launched this offers in Iceland a few years ago in Meniga app as an experiment, knowing Iceland, like most of Europe, is quite privacy sensitive. People will think this is super scary, this is like Minority Report, just knowing you better than yourself. And so we put a lot of effort in explaining it and making sure you only saw super relevant things. And we were very happy to see that as long as we did a good job with this and people understood it, I think that convenience, that value that you perceived massively trumps any kind of fear of privacy. But it matters how you do it. If you do it in the wrong way, it can feel creepy. If you shoot too broadly, it's spam and so on. So it's all about getting it right.
Yeah. What do you think the role of a financial regulator is in the fintech landscape? Should they be both trying to promote innovation, as regulators like in Britain, the Financial Conduct Authority has a kind of competition remit. So it's actually one of the things it does is focuses on promoting innovation, and it was the first to set up one of these fintech sandboxes to allow firms to test out products in a kind of controlled environment on a limited number of customers. But there are some worries that this kind of promotion of innovation might be a bit at odds with what a regulator's job should be. And if you think about some of the financial innovation we've seen in recent years, some of those innovations helped cause the financial crisis, for example. Do you think that the role of a financial regulator should be just to protect consumers and investors, or should they be doing this kind of innovation promotion that they are doing?
Well, I think regulators are very important. We don't fear regulators because our industry has always been regulated. It's true that now it's the pace of the regulation which is accelerating more and more with the competition which is rising, with new players arriving with new ideas, and we need to regulate everybody. At the end, as you say, it's good for the customers because they can benefit from very good pricing, and I guess that in the room today we have a lot of people who have a Revolut account and 26 account, and they are very happy to use their account and their card when they are abroad, definitely. The point here is that it's a strong opportunity for us as well as bank to make sure that the world doesn't go wild. We need to be very cautious because at the end we're speaking about money, we're speaking about customers and trust. So in some markets, banks are not trusted anymore. In some, they are still very strong. If I take the Central and Eastern Europe region where I'm working, the banks still have a very good image. And even when we speak to young generation, they don't necessarily look for opening a current account totally remote. We made some surveys with customers and they said, no, we want to come to the bank, we want to see you because you are very serious, and we are serious because of the regulation as well that is imposed on us. So I don't see it as a threat. And on the other hand, I was in a meeting where FCA guys were present and there was some interesting questions. They have to be cautious themselves as well. They cannot push too much. They can go slowly because banks are big employers, and if they disrupt too much the market, they will create damage as well on the market, on the population. So it's something that should be done, but slowly and carefully.
Could I just add to that, as an entrepreneur, I think in general, it's not just for financial regulators, it's good that they cut some slack when it comes to new stuff, smaller business trying to bend the rules a little bit to get in and try new stuff. And you can't be as tough, as rigid on that in the beginning, because then you just kill innovation. So I don't know about exactly how that will work, but there need to be a difference between the largest bank in the world and new small players coming in trying new initiatives. They can't be following all the same steps and the full process of applying everything, because then it will never come into play. So that's an entrepreneurial view on regulatory.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Georg, were you going to add
Yeah, I
something?
think we're living in very interesting times when it comes to the regulator. I think we're seeing them trying to be more forward-looking now than they've, at least some of them, like I think the FCA in the UK is a prime example. And it's more like trying to create a competitive advantage for London and the UK, and I think others are looking at that lead. And we also, I think, see in Europe with PSD2 and GDPR, that's having effect way beyond Europe. Europe has sometimes been criticized to being over-regulated. For example, that you hear that Airbnb or Uber could not have happened in Europe because it was too regulated. So it happened somewhere else and then came there when it had the strength. But now I think with, for example, GDPR, it's trying to establish this simple principle that I think everyone likes, that people own their own data, they should be able to move it around. It's not the companies, it's a simple principle that is also having effect outside of Europe on the big tech companies. They are implementing those safeguards. And so it's playing into it. I think it's part of innovation. I think part of now where companies such as Meniga choose to locate, I think it matters what kind of regulation, how forward-looking is the regulator, how open are they for new things. And it's a very tricky balance, because regulation by definition is a little bit looking at the current situation and the past. So striking that balance while keeping it open for disruption is tricky, but we are seeing, I think, a little bit of a shift in thinking there, which I'm encouraged by as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm going to take a question from Slido. What should a bank's IT department concentrate on? In other words, I think this question is answering versus what is best provided by the fintech. In other words, what can a bank do that the fintech market isn't already doing, I guess? Or maybe that the fintech market doesn't have the capacity for, because it doesn't have potentially the banking license or the balance sheet. What's the opportunity for a bank's IT department?
I would like to hear the opinion of
Disruptor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a huge question, because I'm not running an IT department on a bank. But I think in general, with all this new opening up, and closing up or becoming really a partner to the smaller, as we call them, fintechs, the hard part is not to get a deal with a bank. The hard part is to actually get access to the systems. And open APIs or DAI was something we talked about, and that is probably what they should work a lot about, opening up their platforms and not be scared about it. And just to comment on something Geert said before, that banking or the financial sector is under regulation or disruption right now. And at the same time, physical retail is going through a lot. And that has just started, even though the e-commerce thing has gone on for quite some time right now. It's just started the process of all this. And banks and retail share a few things in common. They are very geographically fragmented. They are localized in a lot of things. And a lot of the transactions you do are happening in Reykjavik. Then it's only retail here in Reykjavik. So they are aligned there. But actually be powerful over time together with all these transactions and the intelligence you can build on top of it to be sustainable over time. You need to open up beyond that. Cross banks, cross retail, cross borders, to actually be a fighting force versus Google or Facebook. Facebook has 2.2 billion users. That's hard to fight. If you are an Icelandic bank here, you have maximum 375,000 people in your network. I don't think any bank has that many here. So I think, going back, open up, share stuff, cross back. You are not competing with all this data. You're competing about big guys.
I can see how that might give, because you've just used the Facebook example, 2.2 billion customers. But if all of the banks are opening up and they can't all compete, I mean, how would that benefit a bank? I mean, what can a bank do to kind of keep the edge?
But the point is, when you open up, it's not you competing. It's new innovation, new companies that will facilitate on top of this data, creating new services that could compete. So it's not the bank itself. It's new companies, new innovative applications, whatever, that will create some stuff we don't even know could exist until the data opens up.
Yeah, I think that I agree with that, but also I think you have to have a strategy. I mean, opening up, adding APIs to everything makes sense as a strategic option, but it doesn't mean necessarily that you open it up and give everything for free. It could mean that you partner with select fintechs or that you just use it internally, but at least retaining it as a strategic option is important. So that's one aspect. Another thing, we've been privileged to be part of many innovative projects with banks in many countries through the last 9 years. And I think one of the biggest success factor in all these projects I've seen is not about the actual technology, but about the organization of the IT department, so that they're organized to innovate and execute and move fast. And sometimes if you're trying to do something disruptive or new, you need to organize differently. So some projects may be best suited to be put in full-time people in a separate building or room, sequestered away and isolated from the rest of the organization. For other projects, you want to make them part of the organization, but thinking about what kind of organizational design fits in the IT development, because these legacy problems to overcome while at the same time get ready for the future, this is a really daunting challenge, and organization of people is probably the biggest single factor.
I want to speak to that as well, because that's also where the culture really comes in, and this is something that I really relate to from the game industry, because the game industry is also struggling from moving from physical retail into games as a service. And the conversation about legacy systems and the dinosaurs is very relevant for our industry as well. And it's so important when you're actually thinking about the structure of the teams and the culture that there is this awareness that when you talk about the legacy in a negative way, as in this is so slow and it's so old and it's so rubbish and we just have to make all of it new. You also have to remember that you actually have teams and you have people who worked and built it up. And yes, they know it's slow and it's old and it has to change, but this is also the legacy. This is what made us successful, and they will protect it. And if they feel like someone comes in and talks down to it, they will automatically go into gear of protecting it, because the thinking is, you don't understand it. I can hear you don't understand it because you don't respect it. But at the same time, the same individuals, because they're smart, they built this. They know it has to change, but they also get the urge to save it from you. So you have to think about how you're going to build those cultural bridges, and how are you going to get to make sure that the legacy, both the culture, the system, and the people, that they actually venture with you on this journey. So in some cases, it's smart to actually build and move teams to the side, but often that actually creates friction between the teams. Because what we talked about, I think, earlier today, when this is the future, what are the rest then?
Right, yeah. So respect your elders, not just the millennials. I think
think about that the millennials are actually middle-aged by now.
Exactly.
So we tend to think about the millennials as they're teenagers, but they're not.
No.
I'm a millennial. I'm a soon mom of 3, almost turning 40. So, we have to update sometimes our cultural references.
it's true, exactly. All right, I think we might be out of time, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.